Hey, and welcome to the Leniverse. I am Leni, and I am reading the longlist for the Women's Prize for Fiction. And today I want to talk about books by Karen Lord. When I saw that a work of science fiction had ended up on the longlist, I was really excited. It was unexpected, and I am definitely a science fiction reader, so this was cause for some celebration. The book was also presented as climate fiction, which made me even more excited. Now, what the judges in the Women's Prize said nothing about is that the book by Karen Lord, The Blue Beautiful World, is actually book 3 in a series. And when I looked into that, there seemed to be some disagreement as to whether or not it was really a series. Was this book actually the third in a series? Was it more of a companion piece? Was it simply set in the same world, but with a completely different plot and different characters? But there did seem to be agreement that a lot of the world building takes part in the first 2 books. So, being really excited for science fiction, I decided to read all 3 books so that I can tell you whether you should read all 3 books or if the third book is actually a standalone. But the first thing I need to do is address the idea that this is climate fiction. The longlist presentation of the book said something like, "This book literally takes a knife to climate change and shows us what humanity will become in the future, or what humanity might become in the future." I am not entirely sure what they mean by taking a knife to climate change, but after having read the book, I can tell you that that's not what the book does. It is not a book about climate change, and it most definitely does not show you what humanity will or even might become in the future. There is zero chance of this being an actual vision of the future. If you do want a book that will show you how bad the effects of climate change will become, and that shows you a possible path forwards for creating a new and better society and avoid extinction, then I recommend The Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. That's not a book written by a woman, and if you do have suggestions for climate fiction books written by women, please let me know in the comments. And I should probably warn you that Kim Stanley Robinson writes fairly hard science fiction, and there's a lot of soft sciences in there as well, and a lot of interpersonal stuff. But he does have a tendency to get really excited about showing you that the science is real and sort of prove that this is a potential real future. That said, I have no science background and I still like his books. I just sometimes skim part bits that I don't quite understand. Karen Lord, on the other hand, does not write hard science fiction. There is science there, of course. Let's talk about DNA and this VR technology, but it's basically just, this is the future, it has future technology. This is an alien planet, they have alien technology. She doesn't try to actually explain it or make you believe that this is a real scientific thing. So if you're a bit science shy, that should not put you off Karen Lord. If you do like your science fiction to be science heavy, hard science fiction, then the Karen Lord is probably not for you. Now, what was said about the book in the longlist presentation is, I don't know, why did they say that? Did we even read the same book? I have no idea why they would say that. If you look to the blurb for help about what this book is about, don't. I mean, I don't recommend reading blurbs in general, but I especially don't recommend it for this book series. The blurb for The Blue Beautiful World is not exactly wrong, but it does give you the wrong expectations. The blurb focuses on there being a group of people who are trying to prepare the rest of planet Earth for first contact with aliens. And it also says that they have a sort of a secret weapon, a pop star with some special charismatic abilities. All of this isn't wrong, but it's just not a very good description of the book. The blurb makes the book sounds kind of like shades of Catherynne Valente and space opera, where you have a ragtag group of has-been musicians who need to save planet Earth from destruction by entering a sort of galactic Eurovision, where getting nil points is a lot more dramatic than in the actual Eurovision. That book is great fun, and I am looking forward to the sequel, and I can definitely recommend it if you want to read Eurovision in space. But once again, that's not what the Karen Lord book is. In fact, I would draw no comparisons with Catherynne Valente. When it comes to style, Catherynne Valente leans more in direction of Douglas Adams, whereas Karen Lord is more along the lines of Becky Chambers, with a hint of Ursula K. Le Guin. Now, both of those directions in science fiction are great, but they are different. Okay, so now that I have covered what the book is not, what it's not about, it is time to talk about what it is and whether it is a standalone. But actually, in order to do that, I am going to start with book 1 in the series. Book 1 is called The Best of All Possible Worlds. It took me a while to understand this cover, but it's actually not too bad of a representation. A better one would be to have a hummingbird, an elephant, and some sort of sea creature, like a manta ray or maybe something prehistoric. That would actually be perfect. But this isn't bad either. There's a lot of flora and fauna and a hummingbird, sort of. Now, once again, the blurb is less than helpful. It's actually a bit inane. It starts with saying that the female main character remembers when the Sadiri arrived on her planet, and also that the male main character remembers the moment he was told his planet was destroyed, which sort of makes it seem like there's an equivalent between saying that you remember when a bunch of refugees arrived and you remember the destruction of your planet. It also makes it sound like this was a while ago, and it isn't. This is like real time. And by the way, there will be no spoilers. Everything I say will be just from like the very beginning of the books, or just overall information and no plot spoilers. Actually, this book is not at all plot heavy, so there's not that much plot to spoil. It also says that they must work together to rebuild his decimated population by searching for the last surviving members of his race. Yes, but also no. So, the background from the very start of the book is that, yes, a planet has been destroyed, and the survivors are overwhelmingly male. So this is not a book about finding the survivors of his race, it's about finding brides. And not just any brides. The Sadiri are actually a race of telepaths. Over millennia, they have honed their mental skills to the point where they, as a society, have a constant telepathic awareness of each other. And they are also used to having a much deeper telepathic bond with a permanent partner. So for them, having to join a society of non-telepaths or marry somebody without telepathic ability would be both a destruction of their culture and also an extremely lonely experience. So they have come to a planet called Cygna Beta because other Sadiri in the past have settled there. The Sadiri society is fairly strict. They are very focused on honing their telepathic abilities and meditation and always being in control. So it's a fairly restrictive kind of life. And so over the past centuries, there have been groups that either because they just didn't want to live in that way, or maybe because their telepathic ability wasn't at the same level as was expected from society, so they felt like outsiders. Well, they have moved to Cygna Beta. Cygna Beta also has a lot of different population groups from other planets. They are the real, like the melting pot of the galaxy. So the mission here is to go around and try to find some of those earlier emigrated groups and to see if maybe there are some women there who both have the telepathic ability and the willingness to live in accordance with the original culture. And so this book is about a couple of representatives who are traveling along with some Cygna Beta civil servants around visiting a lot of very different cultures on the planet. So it's an exploration of different ways of life, and it's also an extremely slow burn romance. And I do mean a slow burn. It's the slowest of slow burns. The courtship between these two people kind of reminds me of there's a Jane Austen adaptation. I don't remember which one or even from which book, but there is a scene where the male romantic lead hands the woman into a carriage. And so their hands are touching for the first time as he helps her in and sees her off. And both characters become hyper-focused on this one tiny touch of the fingertips. The camera is focused on it. That's what this romance is like. It is slow and it's tiny, tiny little details as it builds. If you like that kind of romance, then I predict that you will really like this book. I'm not a big romance reader, especially not straight romance, because it tends to end up in gender stereotypes. But I found this really charming, and I found the exploration of the different settlements and the different cultures on this planet to be quite interesting and at times very amusing. So this is a book that has a calamity as a backdrop, but it focuses on the personal. The world building comes really step by step. You get little tidbits about different planets and races and the political background just in tiny drips throughout. Of the three books, I would say that this is the one that is the most standalone. But also, if you have started the book on the long list and you are completely lost and confused, this one will give you a bit of background. So maybe if you have the time and the inclination, give it a try. Then we move on to the second book, The Galaxy Game. Now, it took me a stupidly long time to work out this cover. Because, okay, you have a galaxy, I guess, and then there's a swan. And I was like, why a swan? There's no swan in this book. It wasn't until I'd actually finished the book that I realized Cygna Beta is the constellation of the swan. That's why we have a swan. Now, if you read the blurb on this book, it will basically tell you a summary of almost the entire plot. So just don't do it. This book follows on a few months, maybe a year, after the Best of All Possible Worlds, but it revolves around the nephew of the female main character from the first book. You do meet him briefly in the first book. He is a teenager and it is a coming-of-age story. However, the book starts and ends maybe 15, 20, 25 years into the future, and then you get the story, the journey, as the main part of the book. And even though the story clearly revolves around Rafi, the nephew from the first book, he's actually not the first-person character. Karen Lord did that a bit in the first book as well, where just at the end of certain chapters you would get a first-person perspective from the character that you didn't follow for the rest of the book. And it did seem a bit strange, but it wasn't as noticeable as it is in here, where one of Rafi's friends has the first-person perspective and he keeps having chapters, but he's clearly not the main character. I don't know why she's done it that way. If anybody were to have the first-person narrative, it should be Rafi, but there's no reason why anybody should have the first-person narrative. You could just stick to third-person for all of them. Now, in this book, we look at the wider political significance of the destruction of the planet in the first book. The planet that was destroyed, they were kind of the galactic police force as well. They had developed a good judiciary system, and they were known for their, good mental ability and impartiality, and they were just good judges. So everybody else, when they had an interplanetary conflict, they would come to them, and they would also be the ones that would police the spaceways and keep piracy and the slave trade at bay. And now, with telepath women being in such short supply, they have become a valuable commodity, and some women are simply disappearing, possibly taken by slavers. There's a political power vacuum in the galaxy, and the various planets and types of people or types of humanity, because they're all kind of human here, they're just not Earth human. And so they're all kind of scrambling for who will be the next power. So this book does a lot more of the world building, and in fact, if you only want to read the third book but you're confused in the third book, you might want to just download a sample of this book from Amazon. They'll give you first, I don't know how many, 10% maybe of the book, and you don't need that many. Because in the first 4 pages of this book, you get pretty much all the world building info, including origin myths and everything that you have to work your way through this whole book for. It just gets summarized here. Complete info dump at the beginning. So if you read those 4 pages, you are decently set to understand. I was about to say the world, but the galaxy. Now, even though there are a lot of political things afoot here, again, the book mostly concentrates on a teenager. It's a coming-of-age story in a time of great political upheaval. I don't want to say anything about how these things tie together or what this teenager's coming-of-age story has to do with any of the political stuff happening, because that would be spoiled territory. I will say that the book also, somewhat weirdly, focuses quite a lot on this strange sport that it's a competitive team sport that is a bit like parkour, where they are climbing a wall and leaping around ledges and stuff. And this wall has varying gravity. Gravity varies in strength, and it also varies in direction. And while there is a good reason for this sport being in the book, and for this sport existing in the first place, I did find it a little bit strange that the book had so much about this sport. With everything else that's going on, it seemed slightly out of focus. That said, you do get a lot of world building sort of organically put in here. The book ends on, well, the plot line is sort of comes to a conclusion of sorts. Since we go forward in time, we do know where Raffi has ended up. But the book also ends on not a cliffhanger, but there's a very unresolved mystery revolving around a different character. And in a way, this feels like a setup for that mystery to be resolved in the third book. But is it? Again, the answer is yes, but not really. And I kind of get the feeling that while the third book does bring the overarching political plot to some sort of conclusion, it definitely opened for both yet another book set even further in the future, and for sort of a sideways spin-off following this one particular character. But yes, that brings us finally to The Blue Beautiful World, which is the book on the long list. This book is set just a couple of years after the end of the second book, and we are finally on Earth. Now, Earth and its place in the galaxy and the reason why we on Earth don't know about these other people, that's all been explained in the first 2 books. The third book sort of gives you this information as well, but you have to work really hard for it. And as for characters, well, obviously the Earth characters are new, but you do meet practically every major character that's from the first 2 books. If you go into the 3rd book without having read anything, again, I definitely recommend reading the first 4 pages of the Galaxy game for a little bit of background. There's also, at the very back of the book, there's a list of characters and the planets, so sort of a glossary. And that goes book by book, segment by segment, pretty much. And that would be a massive spoiler for the first 2 books. But it is there for you to refer to if you need it. And even reading these books back to back, I was still a bit confused because all of a sudden they used different names for all the planets. In the first 2 books, they used the names based on the population groups there, for the most part. Their popular names. In the 3rd book, they use the scientific names instead. The scientific names are mentioned in book 2 somewhere, but it's not something that I memorized. I just remember that it was there, so you have been given the information, but it was still rather confusing when I got to the 3rd book and I started reading about somebody from a particular planet making a political move, and I started thinking, are those the telepaths, or are they the empaths, or are they the traders, and which faction are they from? And it was made unnecessarily complicated. In addition, there are characters there who have different titles and different identities that you can maybe recognize from their mannerisms or the way that people refer to them. For me, it took about 40 pages to be absolutely sure who the players were and what was going on. If you haven't read the 2 first books, obviously you won't know. You will just have to keep an open mind and just go with the plot. There's also a lot of mention of other characters and events in the past that seems like really rushed and shoddy character development and shoddy world building if you haven't read the first 2 books, because if you have read them, then you understand immediately what they are alluding to and why this is important and why this character is reacting in this way. And so basically, book 3 is the natural progression from the political events of the first 2 books that leads to the rest of the galaxy making themselves known to Earth. And if you read the 2 first books, you know what the stakes are, you know who the players are. If you haven't, I think you will be confused and find the whole thing a little bit messy and the focus a bit strange. I will say this though, there's no first-person narrative in this book. Karen Lord ditched that, fortunately. And when it comes to the cover, I'm not quite sure what's going on. It kind of looks like maybe it's a wormhole or something. And that's not really how they travel, even though it's a common trope in science fiction. Actually, I say that, but there are multiple means of transportation, and some of them are visually kind of weird, and it could very well be a depiction of it. Never mind, it definitely looks clearly like a science fiction book, unlike these 2, which could be kind of anything. So, all of this to say, The Blue Beautiful World, is it a standalone? Yes, but also not really. You can read it as a standalone, but you might be hopelessly lost, and the book will definitely be better, and you will feel more invested, and the characters will feel more, they will make more sense if you read the first 2 books first. Overall, I actually liked the first book the best, maybe because it had a narrower scope and so was able to treat the material more thoroughly, whereas in the other 2 books, there's just a bit too much going on and the focus is in strange places, and in the 3rd book, we do jump in time and place quite a lot. So it seems like the focus has moved away from the characters and is more about actually following the events and the characters are more there to facilitate the plot rather than the plot being there to facilitate the characters. So overall, I am quite happy that the Women's Prize introduced me to this series. I hope there will be more books. I will definitely read them. But I am still a bit baffled as to why it is on the list, and I don't think it's entirely fair to present this book as a climate change book and not mention that it's part of a series. Yeah, I'm just baffled by the whole thing. Basically, if you're not a science fiction reader, I don't think this is going to convert you, especially not if you dive straight into the third book. If you are a science fiction reader, then sure, give it a go. You might like it. I did. And now I think I have said more than enough about these books, and I shall go back to reading the 7 remaining books on the long list. And hopefully I will have another video ready in not too many days. Until then, thank you for watching and happy reading.